Hello and welcome to Cloud Forest Vibes. My name's Bobby, and this is how I grow orchids and carnivorous plants. Hello and welcome to Cloud Forest Vibes. It's time yet again for another care collab video. This time our topic is care for Tolumnia orchids. I'm really excited about this video. Nina posted a video not too far back requesting participants, and I was extremely eager to jump right in. Tolumnias are one of my favorite genus to grow. They're super rewarding and awesome little plants. You can pack so many of them into such a small place, and as long as you can provide them enough light and humidity, they're pretty easy plants to grow. As I said before, this is a care collab video, so there are several other channels participating in this video, and you should definitely make sure that you go and check their channels out and check their videos out as well. The other channels participating in this care collab are Plants and Other Things, Emmy's Orchids, MattByNature, What's Up Orchids, Lynn Smith, Honeybees Orchids, Adysha's Orchid Diaries, Art&Orchids, Michelle's Life on Repeat, and none other than the creator of the Care Collab series herself, Nina with Ninja Orchids. So I'm going to get this camera off the tripod. We're going to go through and talk about some of the Tolumnias that I have real quick, and I'm going to talk about general care for Tolumnias as well as a little bit more specific care, because not all Tolumnias grow the same. It's a pretty vast genus. They are from pretty much the same common area of the world. However, there's lots of different species, and although most of them grow in a very similar manner, there are some oddballs out there. So I'm going to get into some of that today. I do happen to grow several species, more species than I do hybrids at this point in time at least, and some of them do prefer a little bit different care. They are pretty vast in their distribution within their little niche habitats within their own ecosystems, even though they all come from a relatively centralized area. Anyhow, so without further ado, here we go. Alrighty, so we've got the camera off the tripod here, and we're going to take a closer look at my Tolumnias, and we're going to talk about general care for them. In the wild, species Tolumnias are found throughout the Caribbean area, including parts of Florida, and grow in a manner of ways, but mostly epiphytically. Some of them are twig epiphytes, some actually grow terrestrially or as lithophytic orchids, and they grow in a range of conditions, but most of them grow warm, intermediate to warm. Generally speaking, they're miniature to small sized plants, even though some of them, especially the species, can get pretty big and out of control due to their growing habits. The hybrid Tolumnias, like these two here, tend to grow in a clumping manner, just like you see. Again, they're small to miniature sized plants, and they grow epiphytically. Some of your other types of Tolumnias, like your species, like this guy, this little guy, also grow epiphytically, but a lot of times, what you'll notice with Tolumnias is they will vine. They will put out something that looks like a flower spike that continues to grow on, and at the very end of it here, you'll see that they will form a keiki that will latch on to whatever it touches and start a new plant from there. Ultimately, this plant will get mature enough to grow another one of these spikes and continue to grow on if you let it. A lot of species Tolumnias do this. This is Tolumnia Baja Mensahs. I know Tolumnia Europhylla down here does that. Telomere Velutina does that. Tolumnia sylvestris does that. It is something that you can expect if you end up getting into Tolumnia species. So, although the plant itself may stay pretty small, again, small plant, over time it can really spread out and start to be a pain in the butt if you're not ready and prepared to deal with a plant that rambles the way that these do. Having that said, if you're just getting into Tolumnias, it's probably going to be better and easier for you guys to go with one of the hybrids. Because of their growth habit and because general Tolumnia care will work really well for these guys. If you want to be a little bit more adventurous and you can provide an adequate environment for them to grow in, the species Tolumnias are quite fun to grow. They have awesome blooms, as we'll look at here in just a few moments and as we saw earlier, but they can be a bear. Again, you got to deal with the fact that they are a species, they are found naturally in the wild, and they do want to grow a specific way. Casting that aside for now, let's talk about general Tolumnia care. The most important thing I can tell you about Tolumnia orchids is that if you care for the roots, you will care for the plant. I know that that's very general orchid advice, no matter what genus you're talking about, but especially when it comes to Tolumnias, the roots are everything. The majority of Tolumnia orchids do not want their roots to stay moist for any extended period of time. So what that means is when you water a Tolumnia orchid, you really want its roots to dry within an hour or two of watering, if at all possible. For certain, by sundown. You do not ever want to let Tolumnia roots stay moist overnight. That's a great general rule of thumb. Tolumnias are not heavy feeders, whether speaking about the hybrids or the species, and it's fair to say that you can feed them at low feed levels. I typically do 60 to 80 parts per million, just like I would with most of my pleurophyllid types or masdevallias, that sort of strength. And I do that once a week. No matter whether you're watering or feeding these plants, one of the most important things to remember is it's best to water and feed these plants in the morning. Or if you have a warmer environment, you might have to actually do that twice a day, especially if you're growing them bare rooted like I do. I'm fortunate enough to grow in a tent where I maintain a high humidity, which is my next talking point, but the humidity helps me to where these plants stay happy. I can mist down the bare bark, it stays moist for an hour or so, and over the first few hours in the morning, especially when in full sun, these plants tend to dry out pretty quickly. In the hotter months, when it gets above 80 degrees, I will revisit them sometimes in the early afternoon, and I may give them another light misting if I feel like it's been too warm for them and they need a little bit more hydration. Tolumnias have these awesome succulent leaves. It's hard to kind of see on film, but if I hold this one this way, you can kind of see it's triangular, pyramid shaped. It has this ridge down the middle, but they are fleshy. The leaves act as a storage mechanism for these plants, so they hydrate really well and really quickly. They pump moisture up into these leaves. The leaves hold the moisture, therefore they can grow without too much water constantly around the roots. Getting back to the humidity topic, these plants do come from the Caribbean. A lot of them grow very close to the ocean, sea level or up to, a few hundred meters, and in their native environment especially, they're very accustomed to high humidity. If you're going to successfully keep Tolumnias, this is something that you really want to keep in mind. The majority of Tolumnia orchids, they want a humidity of 80% or better, 80 to 90 I would say. The other thing about keeping Tolumnia orchids is they really do like airflow. If you keep 90% humidity or 80% humidity even with these plants, and you do not provide them with sufficient airflow, you're setting yourself up for a situation where the fans are going to get too moist, they're not going to evaporate out, the roots are not going to dry fast enough, and you might have really bad effects and lose your plants. As I mentioned before, Tolumnia roots do not like to stay moist for any sort of extended period of time, so my preferred method, and a lot of people's preferred method for growing them, is to mount them. All of my Tolumnia orchids are mounted, and if you'll notice, I can zoom back in again, all of them are mounted bare rooted, except for this one, which I got with just the smallest piece of sphagnum moss on it that doesn't stay moist for more than a few hours. But everything else that you see in the Tolumnia department, every one of my plants grows bare rooted. I do that for a reason. Again, the roots really need to dry out in between waterings. Having that said, lots of different people grow Tolumnias in many different ways. You see people growing them bare rooted, sitting in a little clay pot or sitting in a little plastic basket. You see them growing mounted. Some people use media, small bark, or even sphagnum moss I've seen in certain situations, but that's all going to depend on your environment. I would say the more arid your environment, the more you're going to want to think about potentially using a media or potentially a little bit of sphagnum moss just to be able to provide that little bit of extra humidity and moisture around the roots in the really hot, arid times. Again, these plants thrive on humidity. They're from the Caribbean. They love a nice humid breeze. So the way that I grow them, they are all mounted, again, on this wall here. And behind me, over here, I have a computer fan that is consistently blowing air all across the face of this wall. To add another level to it, my humidifier sits right back here, right behind that fan, and most of the mist comes out into the general area of my grow space, but some of it tails off and gets sucked through that fan inevitably and blown straight in this direction over to the Tolumnias. They love it, I assure you of it. I struggled with these plants at first because I thought they needed sphagnum moss on their mounts. I put a little bit of moss here and a little bit of moss there, but even a little bit was too much, which I'm surprised this little guy has hung in here so long. But again, it's such a negligible amount of moss on here. I haven't had any issues yet, thankfully, but this is on my long list of plants to remount and get off sticks, so this is one of the next remount projects. If I back out a little bit, you'll be able to see the broader array of my Tolumnias. I've got several of them scattered throughout this section, and that is where they all live. This section is very important to Tolumnias in my environment because it is directly in front of my window and directly underneath my big 500 watt grow light. Tolumnia orchids absolutely love bright light. A lot of them like full sun or potentially even need some full sun, but the one thing that is true amongst all Tolumnias is if you cannot provide them with adequate light, they might not bloom. My Tolumnia orchids see very bright indirect light for the first couple hours of the morning, and once the sun comes over the trees behind my apartment, they see full sun through this window through a minimal amount of shade cloth for about 3 or 4 hours. Once the sun starts to disappear behind the other side of my apartment building, this big light above us kicks on and they get 8 hours of just about full sun strength LED light from my artificial lighting. Again, you can provide Tolumnias with lots of different conditions, lots of different things to mount them on, grow them in, but if you cannot provide them with adequate lighting, you may struggle a bit. So keep that in mind because most of them are considered highlight orchids. Now, as I said before, there are some distinct differences between the hybrids and some of the species, but for the most part, a lot of them do grow in a clumping manner just like this. This is my sad little Tolumnia Europhylla, and this is one that will form clumps. It is growing. I almost lost this plant. I kept it far too moist. This was one that I had moss on the mount and it just really tanked very, very fast, but it's starting to grow nicely again. This is a twig epiphyte species, so again, it's very important that twig epiphyte species be grown bare rooted however you decide to grow them, or in a media that's large and chunky enough to dry out extremely quickly. Tolumnia Europhylla tends to grow on bushes and shrubs, and it grows in a coastal region, so it likes high humidity, and it'll thrive as long as you don't drown it. Telomere Velutina here is another species, again, extremely small, extremely miniature. This one grows in the same manner as we talked about before, with a stem that will produce keikis at the end. This will just grow on and vine out. It'll produce a little mat or a little bush once it matures enough. This is another one I struggled with. I grew it too moist. I've had these for a couple years, and I'm just now really getting the hang of growing them. All the Tolumnias in my environment, especially because of my humidity levels, they have to be grown bare rooted. Another really neat species, this is Tolumnia Kalo Kyla. This has really awesome yellow blooms, but this one's really interesting because this one grows practically in a desert. It grows in a rain shadow, it's xerophytic conditions, it really doesn't get a whole lot of water. Basically every time I water my other Tolumnias, this one gets skipped and only watered every other time. It thrives basically almost entirely off the humidity in my environment. If you were to get something like this, this is one that if you're going to water, absolutely has to be in the mornings, because mostly in the wild, this species would just get a little bit of dew in the morning from clouds rolling in off the ocean, and whatnot. It does not see a lot of rain in its native environment. Conversely, this Tolumnia next to it, Tolumnia sylvestris, is actually a terrestrial. It can grow epiphytically as well, but in the wild it's mainly found as a terrestrial growing on clumps of grass and detritus and things like that. Really interesting one. This is one that when I got it had really long stalks like this, and this growth was on one and this growth was on another. So I nipped them off, I put them on, I think I set the plant back a bit. It has kind of struggled. I had lots of moss on this mount because I did find out it was a terrestrial. I thought it would like to grow a little bit more moist, but again, in my environment it really has struggled a bit. So I've recently peeled all the moss off of this and all my other Tolumnia mounts, and it is growing again, and we've got another new growth, and I'm really hoping to see this thing push on. The growth up here that's attached itself really did well. It's got several new growths, and I am hoping to see this thing flower hopefully in the next year or so. My newest Tolumnia, I got this from Andy's as a gift not very long ago. It still has its little cakey spud on it, or whatever you want to call that. And this is a neat species. This is Tolumnia Baja Mensahs. It grows epiphytically in rosemary scrub, but this is an interesting Tolumnia to me because it is one of the only Tolumnia species that is native to Florida. So you know how much, if you've watched my channel, I love my native United States epiphytes. This is one of them. I just got this again. I don't know much about it. It's still on this stick with moss on it, so this has to get dealt with immediately, but I'm really excited to grow this plant on and see how it does. And the final species that I grow is this. This is Tolumnia Tetrapedulum. This is an awesome, again, miniature species. This one's been super easy to grow for me, has not been fussy at all. It gets bright light, it gets misted every morning, it grows epiphytically, and it has the most awesome blooms. This has been a really faithful bloomer for me. It bloomed last year, it bloomed again this year, and better, I've got 2 flowers on one of these spikes this year. And I'm thinking that once I get this thing mounted onto a new piece of cork, I think it's really going to take off next year. I'm really excited about it. Again, small blooms, small plant, but really rewarding. I do love my Tolumnia species. I just wish I could get some of them to grow better. Tolumnia Europhylla. Neglecting these, if I didn't mention these, this is Tolumnia Gerak Flyer Magic, and this is Tolumnia Gerak Firm Crystal. And I have bloomed both of these successfully in addition to this species that we just looked at, and I'll throw bloom pictures up of these two because they are absolutely magnificent. Anyhow guys, that's my video for today. I hope you guys enjoyed. I have an absolutely terrible habit of forgetting to mention where I'm living and where I'm from in these videos. So I live in the mid-Atlantic region of the United States. I live just outside of the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., and I do grow indoors. I grow in a grow tent setup inside my spare room. I have extremely controllable conditions, so I'm not growing outside in a greenhouse and I'm not growing on a windowsill. I have complete control over my humidity and things at all times. So there's more information about that on my channel. If you guys do want to check that out, I would love it, and I would appreciate it if you did and subscribed, but that's not what this video is about. I do hope this video helped any of you guys, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Please feel free to drop me any questions or comments down below. I do appreciate all of those, and I do get back to every single one of you guys. It just may take a week or two sometimes. Anyhow, thank you all so much for watching. I do appreciate each and every one of you, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Please remember to go and check out all of the other participants in this Care Collabs videos. Again, all the other channels participating are Plants and Other Things, Emmy's Orchids, MattByNature, What's Up Orchids, Lynn Smith, Honeybees and Orchids, Adysha's Orchid Diaries, Art&Orchids, Michelle's Life on Repeat, and Ninja Orchids. This is Bobby from Cloud Forest Vibes, saying again, thank you so much, and please remember, until next time, stay safe and happy growing.